There's a story that shows up again and again, told by hospice nurses, farmers, and pet owners all over the world with no coordination between them. A cat that never leaves the couch suddenly climbs onto a hospital bed and refuses to move. A dog that's been anxious and clingy for weeks suddenly walks off alone into the woods and never comes back. People tell these stories like folklore, like something a little too eerie to fully believe. But some of them aren't folklore at all. They're documented, studied, and in at least one case, published in one of the most respected medical journals in the world. So, can animals actually sense death coming, their own or someone else's? The answer is more complicated and honestly more fascinating than a simple yes or no. Let's start with the case that made this question impossible to dismiss as superstition. In 2007, physician David Dosa published a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine documenting the behavior of a cat named Oscar, living in a Rhode Island nursing home. Oscar had no special training. He wasn't a therapy animal. But staff noticed a consistent, unsettling pattern. Oscar would enter a patient's room, curl up beside them, and stay hours before that patient died. Over time, staff began treating Oscar's presence as an informal warning sign, sometimes calling family members in when he settled onto a particular bed. Nobody claimed Oscar understood death philosophically. The leading theory was far more physical. Oscar was likely detecting subtle chemical changes in the body, shifts linked to the dying process, that human staff simply couldn't smell. That's one well-documented case of an animal sensing death in someone else. But the question in the title is stranger and more specific. Can an animal sense its own? Now here's the part nobody talks about out. Some animals really do seem to change their behavior in the final days of their own lives, and it's been observed across wildly different species. Elephants have long been the subject of elephant graveyard folklore, the idea that dying elephants travel to a specific shared location to die. Researchers studying elephant behavior have generally debunked the idea of a mystical shared graveyard, but they've documented something related and real. Elephants do sometimes separate from the herd when severely ill or dying, moving toward water sources, likely a practical response to weakness and dehydration rather than some conscious ritual around death itself. Meanwhile, cat owners have reported for generations that elderly or terminally ill cats often withdraw and seek out isolated, hidden spaces in their final days, under furniture, in closets, in places far from the household's normal activity. Veterinarians generally attribute this to an instinct inherited from wild ancestors. A sick or dying animal in nature is vulnerable, and hiding reduces the risk of being targeted by predators while too weak to defend itself, so the pattern keeps repeating. But here's the question that actually matters. Is this the animal knowing it's dying, in some conscious, self-aware sense? Or is something much simpler going on? Here's where it gets strange, because the leading scientific explanation isn't about awareness of death at all. It's about something far more physical. Most researchers studying this behavior point toward interoception, an animal's internal sense of its own body's condition, things like pain levels, energy, organ function, and physical decline. A severely ill animal doesn't need to understand the abstract concept of mortality to act on the fact that its body is clearly undeniably failing. Instinctive responses to that internal signal, seeking safety, seeking isolation, conserving energy, can look from the outside exactly like an animal who knows the end is coming, without requiring any philosophical understanding of death whatsoever. In other words, the behavior might be real, documented, and consistent, while the interpretation of the animal understands its own mortality might be something we're projecting onto it, because that's a much more emotionally resonant story than the animal is responding to physical decline instinctively. But wait, if this is just biology and instinct, why does the timing sometimes seem eerily, specifically precise, down to hours? But wait, because Oscar's case and cases like it involve predicting someone else's death, sometimes hours in advance, with real specificity. This is where smell becomes the leading, most concrete explanation. Dogs have roughly 300 million scent receptors compared to a human's approximately 6 million. And researchers have found dogs can be trained to detect certain cancers and even predict epileptic seizures and diabetic blood sugar crashes purely through scent, sometimes minutes before the event becomes clinically detectable through instruments. The dying process itself involves detectable chemical and metabolic shifts, changes in body temperature, circulation, and cellular activity that could plausibly be picked up by a nose sensitive enough to catch them. Oscar likely wasn't reading energy or sensing a soul departing. He was almost certainly smelling something real, something chemical, something happening in the body that human senses simply aren't equipped to detect. The mystery wasn't supernatural. It was just a nose better than ours, doing exactly what noses evolved to do. That reframes the whole question. This isn't animals possessing some mystical sixth sense. It's animals possessing senses so much sharper than ours that the results look mystical from where we're standing. And that's really the thread connecting every version of this story. A cat curling beside a dying patient is not mysticism. It is a nose detecting what a hospital's machines have not yet confirmed. An elephant leaving the herd is not ritual. It is a body responding to its own failing systems. The same instinct written into every wild animal for millions of years. A dog walking off alone into the woods is not resignation. It is an old, inherited instruction, still running quietly in the background, whispering that it is safer to be alone now than to be seen as weak. None of it requires the animal to understand death the way we do. It just requires a body that's honest with itself, and senses sharp enough to listen. So what about the exceptions? Because surely not every animal shows this behavior. Not remotely. Plenty of terminally ill pets show no unusual behavior change at all right up until the end. And plenty of predictive behavior stories, especially retold after the fact, get shaped by human memory bias. We remember the one time the dog acted strange before something bad happened, and quietly forget the dozens of times the dog acted strange and nothing happened at all. Oscar himself was studied specifically because his accuracy was unusually high and consistent, which is exactly why it made it into a medical journal in the first place. Most animals, most of the time, don't show anything nearly this dramatic or reliable, which means the honest answer sits somewhere in the middle. Real biological signals exist. Some animals are unusually good at detecting them, and human storytelling fills in the rest with meaning that may or may not actually be there. So back to that story. The cat on the hospital bed. The dog that walks into the woods alone, maybe it was never about the animal understanding its own ending, or anyone else's. Maybe it was always simpler, and somehow more remarkable than that. A body, human or animal, quietly broadcasting the truth about its own condition long before we're capable of hearing it, to anyone patient enough or sensitive enough to notice. They were never predicting death. They were just listening to something we can't hear yet.